The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Plaza Hotel in Manhattan cast their golden light across Sarah Mitchell's tear-stained face as she watched her world crumble before her eyes. The annual New York Fashion Week after-party, which should have been her crowning moment, had transformed into her worst nightmare. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but your designs won't be featured in the spring collection," announced Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Fashions, his cold voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "Or any collection, for that matter." The whispers began immediately, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Sarah stood frozen, her emerald green evening gown, one she had designed and sewn herself, suddenly feeling too tight, too exposed. The portfolio she had worked on for months lay scattered across the marble floor, her sketches trampled under designer heels. But we had a contract," she managed to whisper, her voice trembling. "I've been working on this collection for a year." Victoria Sterling, Richard's daughter and Sarah's former best friend, stepped forward, her blood-red lips curved in a cruel smile. "Oh, honey," she purred, loud enough for everyone to hear, "did you really think your little boutique designs would be good enough for Sterling Fashions? We only kept you around because Daddy felt sorry for your family after your father's unfortunate accident." The mention of her father sent a sharp pain through Sarah's heart. James Mitchell had been Sterling Fashion's head designer for 20 years before his mysterious fall down the company's stairs left him in a coma. Sarah had been just 24 when she took over his small design studio in Brooklyn, determined to keep his legacy alive while he lay unconscious in Mount Sinai Hospital. Now, at 27, she watched as Victoria casually lifted a champagne glass. "Besides," Victoria continued, "these designs?" She gestured dismissively at the scattered sketches. "They're not exactly original, are they?" Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Richard Sterling stepped forward, his expression a mask of false concern. "We have evidence that you've been copying designs from our European competitors. The lawsuit will be filed tomorrow morning." He shook his head sadly. "Your father would be so disappointed." "That's a lie." Sarah's voice cracked as she finally found her strength. "Every design is original. You know that, Victoria. You saw me create them." But Victoria just laughed, the sound echoing off the ornate walls. "Please escort Ms. Mitchell out," Richard commanded, and 2 security guards materialized beside Sarah. "Her credentials have been revoked, and she is no longer welcome at any Sterling Fashions event." As the guards gently but firmly guided her toward the exit, Sarah caught glimpses of familiar faces in the crowd. People she'd considered friends just moments ago now averted their eyes or whispered behind manicured hands. Only one person, an elderly woman in a vintage Chanel suit, met her gaze with what looked like sympathy. "Wait," the woman called out, but her voice was lost in the commotion. Outside, the autumn air bit at Sarah's exposed shoulders as she was led to the curb. The paparazzi, always present during Fashion Week, began snapping pictures frantically. Tomorrow, her humiliation would be splashed across every fashion blog and magazine in the country. Standing alone on the sidewalk, Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, her dreams lying in shambles at her feet just like her scattered designs inside. A passing taxi splashed through a puddle, soaking the hem of her dress, the dress she'd stayed up 3 nights to finish, hoping to impress potential buyers. Her phone buzzed. A news alert, breaking, Sterling Fashions accuses up-and-coming designer of plagiarism. They hadn't wasted any time destroying her reputation. Another buzz. This time a text from her mother, "Sarah, come home now. The hospital called. It's your father." Sarah's knees nearly buckled. As if sensing her distress, the heavens opened up, and rain began to fall over New York City, matching the tears that streamed down her face. But beneath the crushing weight of betrayal and fear, something else stirred in her heart, a tiny spark of defiance, of determination. "They want to break me," she whispered to herself, her words carried away by the wind. "But I am my father's daughter." Hailing a taxi, Sarah Mitchell made a silent vow. This wasn't the end of her story, it was only the beginning. She didn't know how yet, but someday, she would return to this very spot, not as a victim, but as a victor. And when that day came, Victoria Sterling would learn that some spirits are impossible to break. As the taxi weaved through the rain-slicked streets toward Mount Sinai Hospital, Sarah clutched her mother's locket, the only piece of her design she'd managed to save from the floor. Inside was a small photograph of her family in happier times, and a worn piece of paper with her father's favorite quote, "Success is not built on success. It is built on failure. It is built on frustration. Sometimes it is built on catastrophe." Little did Sarah know, but the elderly woman in the Chanel suit was already making a phone call that would change the course of her life forever. Sometimes, when one door closes, another one opens, even if that door leads down a path you never expected to travel. In the darkness of the taxi's back seat, Sarah Mitchell began to plan. They had taken everything from her, her reputation, her dreams, her designs. But they had forgotten one crucial thing: when you strip away everything from someone who has nothing left to lose, you create something far more dangerous than any enemy. You create a survivor. The fluorescent lights of Mount Sinai Hospital cast harsh shadows across Sarah's face as she rushed through the sterile corridors, her rain-soaked evening gown leaving a trail of water behind her. The click of her heels echoed through the quiet halls, matching the frantic beating of her heart. Room 427 had been her father's home for the past 3 years, but tonight something was different. The usual steady beep of monitors had been replaced by an urgent cacophony of medical equipment. Through the door's window, she could see a team of doctors surrounding her father's bed. "Mom!" Sarah called out, spotting her mother's petite figure huddled in a corner of the waiting area. Margaret Mitchell looked up, her face streaked with tears, and rushed to embrace her daughter. "Oh, Sarah," she whispered, her voice breaking. He opened his eyes. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. "What?" "Just for a few minutes," Margaret explained, her hands trembling as she gripped Sarah's arms. "He said something about the designs, about Sterling, and then he started seizing. They're in there now, trying to stabilize him." Sarah's mind raced. After 3 years of silence, her father had chosen this exact night to wake up, the same night Sterling Fashions had betrayed her. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Mrs. Mitchell?" A tall doctor with kind eyes stepped out of the room. "Your husband is stable now, but what?" Sarah demanded, stepping forward. "He slipped back into the coma. However, this brief period of consciousness is encouraging. It suggests there might be more activity in his brain than we previously thought." As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another news alert: Sterling Fashions announces surprise European collection, sources claim designs similar to those of disgraced designer Sarah Mitchell. "Those thieves," Sarah muttered, her hands clenching into fists. "They're not just destroying my reputation, they're stealing my actual designs." "There's something else," Margaret said quietly, leading Sarah to a secluded corner of the waiting room. From her purse, she pulled out a worn leather notebook. "Your father always kept this with him at work. After his accident, it disappeared. The cleaning staff found it behind a radiator this morning." Sarah's hands shook as she opened the notebook. Inside, in her father's precise handwriting, were notes, dates, and what appeared to be financial records. "Project Aurora," read one header, followed by a series of numbers that made Sarah's eyes widen. "These are proof of embezzlement," she whispered, scanning the pages. "Millions of dollars, being funneled through fake European design houses." Dad was tracking it all. Sarah Mitchell? Both women jumped at the sound of a familiar voice. Standing in the hospital corridor was the elderly woman from the party, her Chanel suit now complemented by a Hermes scarf. Despite the late hour, she looked impeccable. "I'm Eleanor Montgomery," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I was your father's mentor when he first started in fashion, before the Sterlings bought out my company." "Montgomery Designs?" Sarah gasped. The name was legendary in fashion circles, a house that had mysteriously closed its doors 15 years ago, selling everything to Sterling Fashions. The very same. Eleanor smiled, though there was steel in her eyes. "I've been watching you, my dear. Your talent, your integrity, you remind me so much of James. When I saw what happened tonight, I knew it was time to finally step forward." She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Everything you need to know about what really happened to your father is in here. The Sterlings have been running a sophisticated counterfeiting operation for years, using stolen designs to create knockoffs through their European subsidiaries. Your father discovered it, just like he discovered what happened to my company. That's why they had to silence him." Sarah's head spun as pieces began falling into place. The stairs were no accident, Eleanor confirmed grimly. And now they're trying to do the same thing to you, discrediting you before you can expose them. But they made one crucial mistake: they underestimated the power of a woman with nothing left to lose. What can I do? Sarah asked, clutching both the envelope and her father's notebook. They have everything: the money, the power, the connections. Eleanor's lips curved into a knowing smile. My dear, what they have is an empire built on sand. What you have is the truth, and me. I've spent the last 15 years building a network of former Sterling victims, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment and the right person to bring them down. She reached into her bag again and produced a business card for a small boutique in the garment district. Come see me tomorrow. It's time for you to meet the others. It's time for you to learn how to not just survive, but thrive. As Eleanor turned to leave, she paused. Oh, and Sarah? Bring your sketchbook. The world is about to learn what real design looks like. After Eleanor's departure, Sarah stood by her father's bedside, watching his peaceful face in the dim light. She held his hand, feeling the familiar calluses from years of sketching and sewing. I'll make this right, Dad, she promised softly. I'll rebuild everything they took from us, and I'll do it the right way. Her phone buzzed one final time that night. An email from an anonymous sender contained just one line: the truth about Project Aurora will set you free. Meet at midnight, Brooklyn Bridge Park. Come alone. Sarah looked at her mother, who had fallen asleep in the hospital chair, then back at her father. The path ahead was dangerous, but for the first time since the disastrous party, she felt something new stirring in her heart. Hope. Outside the hospital window, the New York skyline glittered like 1,000 stars, each light representing a story, a dream, a possibility. Somewhere in that urban constellation, Victoria Sterling was probably celebrating her apparent victory, unaware that her perfect world was about to unravel thread by thread. Sarah Mitchell smoothed her ruined evening gown, squared her shoulders, and made a silent vow to the sleeping city. They had tried to write her off as just another failed designer, another casualty of the cutthroat fashion world. But they were about to learn what her father had always taught her: fashion was not just about clothes, it was about transformation. And Sarah Mitchell was about to transform herself from victim to victor, one stitch at a time. The midnight air at Brooklyn Bridge Park carried the salty scent of the East River as Sarah Mitchell stood beneath the arch of the Manhattan Bridge, her father's notebook clutched tightly to her chest. The iconic skyline stretched before her like a wall of glittering diamonds, but tonight, each light seemed to hold a secret, a whisper of corruption behind the glamour. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come. Sarah spun around to face the voice, her heart racing. From the shadows emerged a familiar figure, Thomas Sterling, Richard's younger brother and Victoria's uncle. The black sheep of the Sterling family, he'd vanished from the fashion scene 5 years ago amid rumors of alcoholism and fraud. Uncle Tommy, Sarah whispered, using the nickname from happier days when he'd bring her ice cream during long nights at the office with her father. You sent the email? He stepped into the light, and Sarah gasped. The once dashing executive looked haunted, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame, his eyes carrying the weight of too many sleepless nights. Project Aurora isn't just about counterfeiting, Sarah, he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. It's about murder. Before he could continue, the sharp crack of a gunshot split the night air. Thomas's eyes widened in shock as he looked down at his chest, where a red stain was rapidly spreading. Run, he gasped, shoving a USB drive into her hands before collapsing. Sarah's training as a designer had taught her to think fast under pressure. She dove behind a concrete barrier just as another bullet whizzed past. In the distance, she could hear footsteps approaching rapidly. Call 911, she screamed to a couple who had been walking nearby. Then, stuffing the USB drive into her boot, she ran. The next hour passed in a blur of dark alleys and taxi rides taken in random directions to ensure she wasn't being followed. Finally, she found herself standing outside the address Eleanor Montgomery had given her, a seemingly abandoned storefront in the garment district with a faded sign reading "Stitch and Time Alterations." Sarah knocked 3 times, as instructed in Eleanor's text. The door opened to reveal an ultra-modern atelier hidden behind the shabby exterior. A dozen people were gathered around a large table, and Sarah recognized many of them, former designers, models, and executives who had mysteriously left or been forced out of sterling fashions over the years. Sarah, Eleanor stepped forward, her face grave. "We heard about Thomas. He was one of ours." "One of yours?" "The Resistance," said a tall man Sarah recognized as Marcus Chen, once Sterling's top marketing director. "We've been gathering evidence against the Sterlings for years. Thomas was our inside man."
"But now he's dead," Sarah said, her voice breaking.
"Because of me."
"No," Eleanor's voice was firm.
"Because of them.
And his death won't be in vain."
She gestured to the USB drive Sarah had pulled from her boot.
"What he gave you might be the final piece we need." As they plugged the drive into a computer, Sarah's world tilted again.
Project Aurora wasn't just a counterfeiting scheme, it was a massive international money laundering operation.
The Sterlings had been using fake design houses to clean money for some of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world.
"Your father discovered this 3 years ago," Marcus explained.
The fall was their warning. When he didn't stay quiet, they made sure he couldn't talk at all.
"But why wake up now?" Sarah wondered aloud. "Why tonight?" "Because of these," said a new voice.
A petite woman stepped forward, Dr. Rebecca Torres, one of New York's top neurologists.
"I've been monitoring your father's brain activity. Look at the patterns from the night of your fashion show disgrace. The medical charts showed massive spikes in activity."
"He was fighting to warn you," Dr. Torres explained. "His consciousness broke through because he knew you were in danger."
"We need to move fast," Eleanor declared. "Victoria's European collection launch is in 3 days.
They're planning to use your designs as the centerpiece, but with a twist, each piece will be embedded with coded information about their illegal transactions."
"Fashion is a cipher," Sarah breathed, remembering her father's teachings about pattern and detail.
"The designs aren't just stolen, they're being used to pass messages."
"Exactly," Marcus nodded. "But we have something they don't expect."
He pressed a button, and a hidden door slid open to reveal a state-of-the-art design studio.
"Welcome to the real Montgomery Designs, Sarah." "It never closed, it just went underground." Eleanor smiled. "Your father helped set this up before his accident.
Everything you need is here: equipment, materials, and most importantly, people who believe in you."
"It's time to create your comeback collection."
"But the show is in 3 days," Sarah protested. "And you have 30 of the best designers, seamstresses, and pattern makers in New York ready to help," Eleanor countered.
"Plus, something else."
She handed Sarah a leather portfolio.
"Your original designs. Thomas managed to steal them back before." Sarah opened the portfolio with trembling hands.
There they were, her sketches, her patterns, her dreams. But now they represented something more than fashion. They were evidence, ammunition, justice. "Here's the plan," Marcus said, spreading out a blueprint of the Metropolitan Museum, where the show would be held.
"We're going to let them stage their show. Let them think they've won. But we'll be ready with proof of everything: the counterfeiting, the money laundering, the attack on your father, and tonight's shooting. The FBI is already involved, thanks to Thomas's work. They're just waiting for the perfect moment to strike."
"And that moment," Eleanor added with a gleam in her eye, "will be when they least expect it, at the height of their triumph." As the group began to plan, Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. She thought of her father, fighting through years of darkness to protect her. She thought of Thomas, giving his life to expose the truth. She thought of all these people who had lost so much to the Sterling's greed. "I have one condition," she announced, drawing everyone's attention. "When we take them down, we do it with style. If they want to use fashion as a weapon, let's show them how it's really done."
Eleanor's smile widened. "My dear, I was hoping you'd say that. Show us what you have in mind."
For the next hour, Sarah sketched and explained her vision.
It wasn't just about exposing the truth, it was about making a statement.
Each piece would be a testimony to resilience, a celebration of authenticity in a world of counterfeits.
As the night deepened into morning, the underground atelier came alive with purpose. Sewing machines hummed, scissors flashed, and determination filled the air.
They had 3 days to create not just a collection, but a revolution. Outside, New York continued its restless dance of light and shadow, unaware that in a hidden corner of the garment district, an empire's foundations were beginning to crumble. And at the heart of it all, a young designer who had lost everything was about to prove that the true measure of success isn't in what you make, but in what you make of yourself. Victoria Sterling's smirking face filled the morning news, announcing her groundbreaking collection. But for the first time since her public humiliation, Sarah Mitchell smiled back at the screen. Because now she knew something Victoria didn't: the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And the Sterlings were about to have a very long fall indeed. Dawn broke over New York City as Sarah Mitchell stood before the massive design table in the underground atelier, surrounded by a whirlwind of activity. Her fingers flew across sketch paper, making last-minute adjustments to designs that would soon become her weapons of justice. She hadn't slept in 36 hours, but adrenaline and purpose kept her going. "Sarah." Eleanor Montgomery's voice cut through the creative chaos. "There's something you need to see." The elderly designer led her to a private office where a large screen displayed breaking news: Thomas Sterling found dead, Sterling Fashion's heir apparent victim of apparent mugging gone wrong. Victoria Sterling's face filled the screen, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "My beloved uncle, he struggled with his demons, but he was trying to turn his life around. This senseless violence." "Turn it off," Sarah said quietly, her hands clenching into fists. "They're already covering their tracks." "Not as well as they think," said Marcus Chen, entering the room with a tablet. "Our sources say the FBI is treating it as a suspicious death, not a mugging. They're just waiting for us to complete the puzzle." A knock at the door made them all jump. Dr. Torres rushed in, her hospital scrubs wrinkled from a long shift. "Sarah, your father, there's been another development." Sarah's heart stopped. "Is he?" "He's writing," Dr. Torres said, holding up her phone to show a video. On the screen, James Mitchell's hand moved weakly across a notepad, forming shaky but legible words: "The third floor. Behind the blueprints. Victoria knows." "The Sterling Fashions building," Sarah breathed. "Dad's old office was on the third floor. But it's been locked since his accident." "Not for long," said a new voice. A young woman with bright blue hair stepped forward, Lucy Zhang, former head of IT security for Sterling Fashions. "I still have backdoor access to their security systems. I can get you in tonight." Eleanor shook her head. "It's too dangerous. They've already killed once." "Which is exactly why we have to move now," Sarah insisted. "Before they can destroy whatever's hidden there." "Lucy, can you guarantee me 20 minutes? I can give you 30. After midnight, when the cleaning crew changes shifts, there's a blind spot in their routines." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of preparation. While half the team continued work on the collection, Sarah memorized building layouts and security patterns. Marcus arranged for a catering van that would let them approach without suspicion, while Eleanor called in favors from old friends in the NYPD to ensure any suspicious activity reports would be delayed. At exactly midnight, Sarah found herself in the back of a delivery van, dressed in a cleaner's uniform, her heart pounding against her ribs. Lucy's voice came through her earpiece, security cameras looping now. "You have 30 minutes. Go." The Sterling Fashions building looked different at night, more ominous, its glass and steel facade reflecting the city lights like a wall of cold stars. Sarah moved through the familiar halls like a ghost, remembering countless childhood visits to her father's office. The third floor was dark and silent. Her father's old office still had his name on the door, though the letters were dusty with neglect. The lock clicked open under Lucy's electronic manipulation. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been 3 years ago, even the half-empty coffee cup on the desk, now growing mold. Sarah moved quickly to the wall of blueprints, her flashlight beam dancing across the architectural drawings her father had always loved to collect. "Behind the blueprints," she muttered, running her hands along the frames. There, behind a blueprint of the original Sterling building, she felt it. A small safe, perfectly concealed. "Lucy, I need help with the safe." "Model number?" Sarah read off the digits. "It's an older model. Your father's birthday might." The safe clicked open on the first try. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten letter in her father's precise handwriting, dated the day before his accident. "I found something," she whispered into her comm unit. "I'm heading back." "Wait," Lucy's voice crackled with sudden urgency. "Movement on the second floor. Someone else is in the building." Sarah's blood ran cold as she heard the unmistakable sound of high heels clicking on marble stairs. She knew those footsteps, had heard them approaching her desk countless times. Victoria Sterling was coming. With nowhere else to hide, Sarah slipped behind a massive filing cabinet just as the office door opened. Victoria entered, followed by two men Sarah didn't recognize. "Search everything," Victoria commanded. "That old fool must have left something behind. The FBI's getting too close, and if Thomas talked before he died." "Miss Sterling," one of the men said gruffly, "what exactly are we looking for?" "Anything that could connect us to Project Aurora. My father thinks he destroyed it all, but James Mitchell was too careful. He always kept backups." From her hiding spot, Sarah held her breath, clutching the USB drive and letter to her chest. The searchers moved methodically through the office, getting closer to her position. Suddenly, her earpiece crackled. "Sarah, get out now. Security's doing an unexpected sweep of the floor." Victoria's head snapped up at the sound. For one heart-stopping moment, Sarah thought she'd been discovered. Then the office door burst open again. "Miss Sterling," a security guard said, "there's been a breach in the lobby. We need to evacuate the building." "What?" "No, we need to finish." "Ma'am, it's a potential bomb threat. We have to go. Now." "Thank you, Marcus," Sarah thought, knowing her friend had arranged the perfect distraction. As Victoria and her companions were hurried from the office, Sarah waited until their footsteps faded before slipping out through the emergency stairs. 30 minutes later, she sat in Eleanor's office with the others, her hands shaking as she plugged in the USB drive. The files it contained were devastating, detailed records of every illegal transaction, every stolen design, every bribe and threat used to build the Sterling empire. But it was her father's letter that brought tears to her eyes. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. The Sterlings have discovered what I know about Project Aurora. I've tried to fight them legally, but their influence runs too deep. Tomorrow, I'm going to confront Richard directly. If anything happens to me, know that everything you need is in this drive. But more importantly, know this, your mother and I have always been proud of you. Your talent, your kindness, your integrity, these are worth more than any fortune built on lies. Whatever happens, stay true to yourself. In the end, that's what really matters. All my love. Dad." "We have everything we need now," Marcus said softly. "The FBI can move as soon as we give the signal." "No," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "Not yet. First, we finish what we started. The collection, the show, everything. I want them to face justice at the height of their arrogance, in front of the entire fashion world." Eleanor smiled. "Then we have work to do. We have 36 hours until the show, and every stitch must be perfect." As the team returned to their tasks with renewed energy, Sarah looked at her father's letter one more time. "Stay true to yourself," he had written. Well, she was about to show the world exactly who Sarah Mitchell really was. And the Sterlings? They were about to learn that some spirits aren't just unbreakable, they're unstoppable. The Metropolitan Museum's grand halls buzzed with pre-show energy as the fashion elite arrived for what was being called the event of the season. Victoria Sterling's European collection preview had drawn celebrities, buyers, and media from around the world. Security was tight, significantly tighter than usual for a fashion show, but no one seemed to notice or care. Behind the scenes, in a small service corridor that had been converted into a makeshift control center, Sarah Mitchell watched the surveillance feeds with her unlikely team of allies. She wore a sleek black jumpsuit of her own design, with hidden pockets containing everything she might need for what was to come. "FBI teams are in position," Marcus reported, touching his earpiece. "They're waiting for our signal." "And our people?" Sarah asked, scanning the crowd on the monitors. Eleanor smiled, adjusting her elegant evening gown. "Every key position is covered. Ushers, security, even the lighting crew, we've replaced them all with our own. Victoria won't be able to sneeze without us knowing about it." Speaking of Victoria, Lucy interrupted, pointing to one of the screens. Look who just arrived. The Sterling heiress swept into the museum like a queen, wearing a blood-red gown that seemed to catch every camera flash. Behind her, Richard Sterling walked with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Neither of them noticed the dozen undercover agents scattered throughout their entourage. Dr. Torres just texted, Marcus said softly. Your father's showing increased brain activity again. It's like he knows. Sarah touched the locket at her throat, which now contained both her family photo and a micro SD card with copies of all the evidence. He does know. Somehow, he knows we're finally going to make things right. A commotion near the service entrance drew their attention. Rebecca Martinez, once Sterling's top model before being blacklisted for questioning their business practices, rushed in looking pale. We have a problem, she gasped. I just overheard Victoria on her phone. They know someone broke into James's office. They're planning to move everything offshore tonight, right after the show. Once that happens, we'll lose the paper trail, Marcus finished grimly. The FBI won't be able to touch them. Then we move up the timeline, Sarah decided. Lucy, how fast can you get into their systems? The IT expert's fingers flew across her keyboard. I'm already in. But Sarah, if we trigger the evidence dump too early, they might have time to spin it. We're not changing the plan, Sarah said firmly. We're just adding a prelude. She turned to Eleanor. Remember what you taught me about fashion shows? The preview piece sets the tone for everything that follows. Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. You want to send a message before the main event. Exactly. Lucy, can you access the video systems? Full control. Whatever you're planning, I can make it happen. Sarah smiled, and for a moment, she looked so much like her father that Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Good. Because I think it's time the world saw what really happens behind the glamour of Sterling fashions. The next hour passed in a blur of focused activity. While the socialites and celebrities sipped champagne in the Grand Hall, Sarah's team executed their additional preparations with military precision. Every detail had to be perfect, every timing exact. At precisely 8:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled start, Victoria Sterling took the stage for her opening remarks. The spotlight caught her perfectly, making her red gown shimmer like fresh blood. Fashion is about transformation, she began, her voice carrying through the perfect acoustics. About taking something ordinary and making it extraordinary. Tonight, Sterling Fashions is proud to present a collection that will transform the industry itself. The lights suddenly dimmed, and the massive screens behind Victoria flickered to life. But instead of the planned promotional video, a different image appeared, security footage from 3 years ago, showing James Mitchell confronting Richard Sterling in his office. You can't keep doing this, Richard, James's voice echoed through the hall. These aren't just designs you're stealing, these are people's lives, their dreams. The audience murmured in confusion. Victoria's perfect smile faltered as she tried to signal the tech booth, but Lucy's programming held firm. The footage continued, showing a series of damning scenes, secret meetings with counterfeiters, documents being shredded, models being threatened into silence. Then came the most devastating clip, Richard Sterling ordering his security team to take care of the James Mitchell problem the day before the accident. As the evidence unfolded on screen, FBI agents began moving through the crowd, quietly securing exits and key positions. Victoria, finally realizing what was happening, turned to flee but found her path blocked by Eleanor Montgomery. Going somewhere, dear? Eleanor asked sweetly. But you haven't even seen the main collection yet. Richard Sterling rushed toward the emergency exit, only to find Marcus Chen waiting with 2 FBI agents. The thing about fashion, Mr. Sterling, Marcus said calmly, is that what goes around, comes around. Through it all, Sarah remained hidden in the wings, watching as 3 years of careful planning came to fruition. But this was only the beginning. The real show, her show, was about to begin. The lights dimmed completely, plunging the hall into darkness. When they rose again, Sarah stood center stage, wearing a stunning white suit that seemed to glow from within. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced to the shocked crowd, my name is Sarah Mitchell. You may remember me as the designer accused of plagiarism by Sterling Fashions.
Tonight, I'm here to show you what real original design looks like, and to tell you a story about power, corruption, and the price of truth. As she spoke, models began emerging from both sides of the stage, each wearing a piece that told part of the story. The first design, a black dress with a shattered glass pattern, represented her father's fall. The second, a suit with hidden newspaper clippings worked into the fabric, documented Sterling's crimes. Each piece was a masterpiece of technical skill and emotional storytelling, but it was the final design that left the audience breathless. A wedding gown, pure white but with a train that gradually transformed into a phoenix rising from ashes, all crafted from thousands of tiny shards of mirrors that reflected the truth back at everyone who saw it. This collection is called Renaissance, Sarah declared, her voice strong and clear. Because sometimes, we have to lose everything to discover who we really are. Sometimes, we have to be broken to become unbreakable. As FBI agents led the Sterling family away in handcuffs, fashion critics were already calling it the most dramatic and meaningful show in New York Fashion Week history. But Sarah barely heard the acclaim. Her eyes were fixed on her phone, where a text from Dr. Torres had just appeared. "He's awake. Really awake. And he's asking for you." In the chaos that followed, as reporters shouted questions and photographers' flashes turned the hall into day, Sarah Mitchell stood unshakable at the center of the storm she had created. Victoria Sterling might have tried to break her spirit, but in doing so, she had only proved what Sarah's father had always taught her. True strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising every time you fall, and helping others rise with you. And this was just the beginning of her rise. The corridors of Mount Sinai Hospital had never seemed longer as Sarah Mitchell ran toward her father's room, still wearing her white designer suit from the show. Behind her, the city buzzed with the news of Sterling Fashion's dramatic fall, but all she could think about was the man who had started her on this path. She burst into room 427 to find James Mitchell sitting up in bed, his eyes clear and alert for the first time in 3 years. Her mother sat beside him, tears streaming down her face as she held his hand. "Dad," Sarah whispered, freezing in the doorway. James Mitchell turned to look at his daughter, and his face broke into the smile she had missed for so long. "My little phoenix," he said, his voice hoarse from years of silence. Sarah flew into his arms, careful of the 4 lines but unable to contain her emotion. "You knew," she sobbed into his shoulder. "Somehow, you knew what was happening." "I heard everything," he confirmed, stroking her hair just as he had when she was a child. "Even in the darkness, I could hear you fighting. I tried so hard to reach you, to warn you." "Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Torres interrupted gently from the doorway. "The media is gathering in the lobby. They know you're awake." "Let them wait," Margaret Mitchell said firmly, protectively standing between her family and the door. But James shook his head. "No. The truth has been waiting long enough." He looked at Sarah. "Help me get dressed, sweetheart. It's time to finish what we started." "Are you sure you're strong enough?" Sarah asked worriedly. James Mitchell's eyes sparkled with the same determination she had inherited. "With you by my side? I've never been stronger." An hour later, Sarah stood beside her father's wheelchair in the hospital's press room, facing a wall of cameras and reporters. The story of Sterling Fashion's downfall had already broken worldwide, but this, the awakening of James Mitchell, added a new dimension that had the media in a frenzy. 3 years ago, James began, his voice growing stronger with each word, "I discovered something that shook me to my core. The company I had given my life to, the people I had trusted as family, were building their empire on theft, fraud, and violence." As he spoke, Sarah watched the reporters' faces change from professional curiosity to genuine shock. Her father had always been a masterful storyteller, and now he was telling the most important story of his life. "They tried to silence me," he continued, "but they didn't realize that truth, like love, can't be destroyed. It can only be transformed." He reached for Sarah's hand. "My daughter proved that tonight." The questions came rapid fire. "Ms. Mitchell, will you be taking over Sterling Fashions?" "Mr. Mitchell, did you always know your daughter would expose the truth? What happens to the company's employees?" Sarah stepped forward, channeling the strength she had discovered within herself. Sterling Fashions was built on lies, but its workforce is built on talent and dedication. Which is why I'm pleased to announce that Eleanor Montgomery and I are launching a new venture, Phoenix House of Fashion.
The announcement caused a stir. Eleanor emerged from the back of the room, elegant as ever. We're offering positions to all Sterling employees who were not involved in the illegal operations, she declared. It's time for fashion to return to its roots, creativity, innovation, and authentic vision.
Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the back of the room. Victoria Sterling, who had been released on bail, pushed her way through the crowd.
Her perfect makeup couldn't hide her fury.
"You think you've won," she spat.
"You think this changes anything? The fashion world is about power, and you're still nothing but a little girl playing dress-up."
The room fell silent. Sarah felt her father squeeze her hand, but she didn't need his support. She was done being afraid.
"You're wrong, Victoria," she said calmly. "Fashion isn't about power, it's about transformation. Something you never understood."
She smiled, and the cameras flashed.
"But don't worry. Orange is about to become the new black for you." The laughter that rippled through the room was the final nail in Victoria Sterling's coffin. As security escorted her out, Sarah turned back to the reporters. "Phoenix House will be different," she announced.
"We're establishing a foundation to support young designers, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds.
Every collection will include collaborations with emerging talents.
We're going to transform the industry, not through force, but through opportunity."
"And justice," James added. "The evidence we've uncovered has exposed corruption throughout the fashion world. This isn't just about the Sterlings, it's about changing the entire system."
As the press conference continued, Sarah's phone buzzed with messages of support from around the world. Designers, models, and industry professionals who had been silenced by the Sterlings were stepping forward, ready to join the revolution. Later that night, in James's hospital room, the core team gathered for a quiet celebration. Lucy had brought champagne, Marcus had ordered food from Sarah's favorite Thai restaurant, and Eleanor had somehow managed to have James's old drafting table delivered to make him feel more at home. "I have something for you," James said to Sarah, nodding toward a leather portfolio Margaret had brought from their home. "I've been designing it in my dreams for 3 years." Inside was a single sketch, a wedding dress more beautiful than anything Sarah had ever seen.
But it wasn't just a dress, it was a story told in fabric and form, a testament to resilience and renewal.
"For your first collection at Phoenix House," he explained. "A reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things come from our darkest moments." Sarah hugged him, careful of his still fragile state. "We're going to change everything," she whispered. "No, sweetheart," he corrected her gently.
"You already have." Outside the hospital window, the New York skyline glittered with possibility.
Somewhere in those lights, the offices of Phoenix House were already being prepared. Tomorrow would bring challenges, restructuring Sterling's former empire, supporting their employees through the transition, building something new from the ashes of corruption. But tonight, in this moment, Sarah Mitchell finally felt complete. She had not only survived, she had transformed her pain into purpose, her fear into strength, her father's legacy into a revolution. Victoria Sterling had tried to break her spirit, but instead, she had only proved what Sarah had known all along: true power doesn't come from breaking others down, it comes from lifting them up. And Sarah Mitchell was just getting started. 6 months after the fall of Sterling Fashions, the New York fashion world had been transformed.
The former Sterling building, its imposing glass facade now adorned with a rising Phoenix logo, hummed with renewed creative energy.
Inside, Sarah Mitchell stood in her father's old office, now their shared workspace, reviewing designs for Phoenix House's inaugural collection. "The young designer's submissions are incredible," she told James, who sat at his restored drafting table, looking healthier with each passing day.
"Especially this one from the Bronx Community Program."
James wheeled his chair closer to examine the sketch, a streetwear-inspired evening gown that seamlessly blended urban edge with classical elegance.
"Talent has always been everywhere," he said.
"It just needed someone brave enough to look for it."
A knock at the door interrupted them. Eleanor Montgomery entered, followed by Marcus Chen and a stern-looking woman in a federal agent's suit. "Sarah, James," Agent Diana Carter nodded. "We have updates on the Sterling case." Sarah's heart quickened. "Victoria?" "Found guilty on all counts," Agent Carter confirmed. 20 years, no possibility of early parole. Richard Sterling got 30. But that's not why I'm here. She placed a thick folder on the desk. We've uncovered more of their network.
Fashion houses in Paris, Milan, even Tokyo, all involved in the money laundering scheme.
How deep does it go? James asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. Deep enough that we need your help, Agent Carter replied. Several major fashion weeks are at risk of collapse if we move too quickly.
We need someone to help stabilize the industry while we clean house.
Sarah exchanged looks with her father and Eleanor.
This was bigger than they'd imagined, but also an unprecedented opportunity for real change. We'll need to move carefully, Eleanor mused. The fashion industry employs millions worldwide.
We can't let it collapse. No, Sarah agreed, an idea forming. But we can help it evolve.
She turned to Marcus.
How quickly can we scale up the Phoenix Foundation?
Marcus grinned, already pulling up projections on his tablet.
With the assets we recovered from Sterling Fashions and the international attention we're getting? Sky's the limit. Over the next hour, they outlined an ambitious plan.
Phoenix House would partner with legitimate fashion houses worldwide, offering support and resources to help them transition away from corrupt practices. The Phoenix Foundation would expand its programs globally, identifying and nurturing new talent in underserved communities. It's not just about fashion anymore, Sarah explained to Agent Carter. It's about creating a new model of doing business.
Ethical. Transparent. Inclusive.
As if on cue, Lucy burst into the office, her blue hair now streaked with phoenix orange. You need to see this, she said, turning on the office's wall screen. A news broadcast showed Victoria Sterling being led from the courthouse after her sentencing. But it was the crowd outside that caught everyone's attention. Dozens of young designers and models, many of them former Sterling victims, stood in silent protest, each wearing a piece from Sarah's Renaissance collection.
The revolution isn't just in New York anymore, Lucy explained, switching to international coverage.
Similar scenes were playing out at fashion houses worldwide. The hashtag Phoenix Rising was trending globally. They're ready for change, Marcus observed. All they needed was a spark. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she watched the coverage.
Dad, do you remember what you used to tell me about fashion? James smiled. That a single thread can change everything? Exactly. Sarah stood, moving to the window that overlooked Manhattan. We're that thread.
And it's time to start weaving. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Phoenix House announced its global initiative, starting with a series of fashion incubators in cities worldwide. Each would combine design facilities, business training, and mentorship programs, creating opportunities for talented individuals who had been previously shut out of the industry.
The first test came at Paris Fashion Week.
As federal agents quietly made arrests behind the scenes, Phoenix House debuted its international collective, 30 designers from 15 countries, each with a unique vision and story. The show opened with the Design from the Bronx program, its young creator receiving a standing ovation. But it was the final piece that brought the house down, a collaborative design by Sarah and James Mitchell, representing their journey from tragedy to triumph.
The fashion world will never be the same, Vogue declared the next day.
Phoenix House hasn't just replaced Sterling Fashions, it's redefined what a fashion empire can be. But Sarah's proudest moment came later that week, during the opening of Phoenix House's first community design center in Brooklyn. As she watched aspiring designers, many of them kids from struggling neighborhoods, explore the state-of-the-art facilities, she felt a hand on her shoulder. You did it, sweetheart, James said softly. You didn't just survive, you made sure others would thrive. We did it, Sarah corrected him, watching as Eleanor led a masterclass in draping techniques while Marcus explained business basics to a group of eager teenagers.
All of us.
That evening, Sarah returned to her father's old office, now their shared creative space, and found a package on her desk. Inside was a magazine with her on the cover, along with a note in Eleanor's elegant handwriting. They tried to break your spirit, but you built an empire instead. An empire of hope, opportunity, and second chances.
Here's to the next chapter. E.
Sarah smiled, touching the phoenix pendant she now wore in place of her old locket. The evidence it had contained had served its purpose. Now it was filled with something new, a thread from her first design and a sketch of her father's phoenix. Outside, New York City glittered in the twilight, its lights reflecting off the windows of Phoenix House like countless stars. Somewhere in those lights, Victoria Sterling sat in her prison cell, stripped of everything she had valued. But Sarah felt no satisfaction in her enemy's fall, only determination to create something meaningful from the ashes of the past. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lucy, "You need to see tomorrow's headlines. We're changing the game again." Sarah smiled, already knowing what the next day would bring. Phoenix House had just acquired its biggest competitor, not to destroy it, but to transform it. The fashion world was about to learn that true power doesn't come from control, it comes from creation. And Sarah Mitchell, the girl they had tried to break, was just beginning to spread her wings. 1 year to the day after the fall of Sterling Fashions, Sarah Mitchell stood on the rooftop garden of Phoenix House, watching the sunrise over Manhattan. The space, once Richard Sterling's private domain, had been transformed into a communal area where designers could find inspiration and peace. "I thought I'd find you here," James Mitchell said, walking steadily toward his daughter. After months of physical therapy, he rarely needed his wheelchair anymore. "Big day ahead." Sarah smiled, taking her father's hand. "Remember when we used to sketch sunrise patterns in your old studio? I never imagined we'd be here." "I did," James replied softly. "From the moment you picked up your first pencil, I knew you were destined for something extraordinary. Though I admit, bringing down an international crime syndicate wasn't exactly what I had in mind." They shared a laugh, but it was interrupted by the arrival of Eleanor Montgomery and Marcus Chen, both looking unusually serious. "It's happening," Marcus announced, holding up his tablet. "Victoria Sterling is giving her first prison interview." They gathered around the screen as Victoria's face appeared, the former fashion queen looking strangely vulnerable in her prison uniform. "I've had a lot of time to think," she was saying. "About power, about legacy, about what really matters. Sarah Mitchell didn't just take our company, she showed the world a better way. And maybe that's what fashion needed all along." Sarah felt tears in her eyes, surprising herself. After everything Victoria had done, she hadn't expected to feel compassion for her former friend. But transformation, she had learned, could touch anyone. "There's more," Eleanor said, pulling up another news alert. "The International Fashion Council has unanimously approved the Phoenix Protocol. All member houses must now adhere to ethical sourcing, transparent business practices, and community investment standards." "Your father's dream," Marcus added, smiling at James. "A fashion industry that lifts people up instead of tearing them down." Before Sarah could respond, Lucy burst onto the rooftop, her hair now sporting phoenix-shaped highlights. "Everyone's arriving for the ceremony. And wait until you see who just showed up." They descended to the main atrium, now a soaring space filled with natural light and living walls. Hundreds of people had gathered for Phoenix House's first anniversary celebration, but it was one particular group that caught Sarah's attention. Standing near the entrance were dozens of former Sterling employees, designers, seamstresses, and staff who had been caught in the crossfire of their employers' crimes. But they weren't alone. With them stood their men's from Phoenix House's community programs, each wearing designs they had created together. "Now that's what I call a legacy," James whispered proudly. The ceremony itself was more than just a celebration, it was a declaration of a new era. One by one, representatives from fashion houses worldwide signed the Phoenix Protocol, committing themselves to the principles Sarah and her team had established. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she looked out at the crowd and saw not just the fashion elite, but the true heart of their industry, young designers from their community programs, ethical suppliers, artisans, and craftspeople who had found new hope in Phoenix House's vision. "A year ago, I stood before you in a very different place," she began. "I had lost everything, or so I thought. But what I discovered was that we never truly lose anything if we learn from it. Every setback is a setup for a comeback. Every end is just a new beginning." She gestured to the massive screens behind her, which displayed images from Phoenix House programs worldwide. "We're not just making clothes, we're making change. Every thread we weave, every stitch we sew, connects us to something larger than ourselves. This isn't just about fashion anymore, it's about showing the world that success doesn't have to come at someone else's expense." The applause was thunderous, but Sarah wasn't finished. Today, I'm proud to announce the James Mitchell Fellowship for Innovative Design. Each year, 50 young designers from underserved communities worldwide will receive full funding for their education and guaranteed positions within our network. James stood, tears streaming down his face, as Sarah continued. But that's not all. Eleanor Montgomery and I are establishing the Phoenix Fund, a $1 billion commitment to transform fashion education and entrepreneurship opportunities globally. Because talent is universal, but opportunity shouldn't be a luxury. The celebration that followed was more than just a party, it was a testament to the power of resilience, renewal, and redemption. In one corner, former Sterling designers collaborated with their community men's. In another, international fashion houses that had once been bitter rivals now discussed joint initiatives for sustainable fashion. Late that night, after most guests had departed, Sarah found herself back on the rooftop garden. But this time, she wasn't alone. Her entire team, her family, had joined her. "Look what came today," Lucy said, handing Sarah an envelope. Inside was a letter from Victoria Sterling, written from prison. "I spent my life trying to be powerful, but you showed me what true power looks like. It's not about breaking spirits, it's about lifting them. I know it's too late for forgiveness, but I want you to know, you didn't just change the fashion world, Sarah. You changed me. What are you going to do?" Eleanor asked softly. Sarah smiled, watching the city lights twinkle like stars. "I'm going to write back. Offer her a chance to contribute to our rehabilitation programs from inside. Because if my story teaches anything, it's that everyone deserves a chance to rise from their ashes." James wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "You know, when I first started in fashion, I dreamed of changing the industry. But you, my dear, you've changed the world." "We all did," Sarah corrected him, looking at her assembled family, Eleanor, Marcus, Lucy, and all the others who had stood by her through the darkest times. "And we're just getting started." As if in response, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Sarah closed her eyes and made a wish, not for herself, but for all the dreamers out there who just needed someone to believe in them. 1 year ago, Victoria Sterling had tried to break her spirit. Instead, she had sparked a revolution. Sarah Mitchell hadn't just built an empire, she had created a legacy of light that would shine for generations to come. In the end, it wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was about transformation, of an industry, of lives, of the very notion of what power could be. And as Sarah Mitchell stood surrounded by her loved ones, watching the stars twinkle over the city she loved, she knew that some spirits aren't just unbreakable. They're unstoppable.